Welcome to the presentation 10 Myths and Faulty Beliefs in Psychology and Psychotherapy. I'm Ofer, a licensed psychologist, ethicist, instructor, expert witness, author of several books and hundreds of articles, and most importantly, an anthropologically critical thinker. I have a long list of myths that I wanted to debunk, and I'll focus today on the top 10 that I have beliefs in our field of psychology that have negatively affected the field of psychology, psychotherapy, and counseling. So we'll start with myth number 1. The inherent power differential between therapist and client, and the related faulty beliefs of once a client, always a client. So from the first day in graduate school of psychology, counseling, MFTs, we, psychotherapists in training, have been instructed to pay great attention to the inherent power differential. We are taught to be aware of the imbalance of power between therapists and clients and repeatedly warned against inadvertently abusing or exploiting our vulnerable client and dependent patients. The idea of power as an attribute possessed exclusively by therapists in the client-therapist relationship has largely left unchallenged in our field. The fact that sometimes psychologists have a lot of power, like psychologists in prison or in the military, sometimes they have life and death kind of power in the military. But our professional newsletter and advice column on ethics and risk management present a unified message that all therapists unilaterally have power over clients who are inherently vulnerable. Many psychotherapist clients are those who are mandated to undergo different types of forensic evaluation are very vulnerable indeed, because a power differential exists in this kind of therapeutic relationship or professional relationship if the therapist is an evaluator. They may be distressed, young, impaired, traumatized, psychotic, anxious, or depressed. However, there are also clients who are functioning very well, functioning highly emotionally functioning, psychologically functioning, and are powerful in many other ways. So this can be wealthy investors, powerful CEOs, established artists, psychologists, forensic psychologists, treaters, or simply very centered, solid human beings who seek therapy to find meaning. They are not depressed, they are not suicidal, they try to seek a highest potential in a certain arena, or perhaps find closer relationship to God. Clients come to us therapists for different reasons. For example, when most of you therapist listener or myself go to our own therapy, we don't feel that the therapists have a lot of power. They are neither depressed, or we are neither depressed sometimes, nor traumatized, not necessarily very vulnerable. As therapists, we must know the difference, and we must remember that not all clients are created equal. I would like to review quickly 9 types of power. I have another YouTube just on this topic, so I would like just to cover the 9 types of power so you'll get a sense of the variability. Legitimate power will be designated legal power like police, for example. Expert knowledge power. Knowledge is indeed power. Number 3, professionalism power. That's the influence aura of power by the professional. Number 4, positional or role power. For example, judges have unquestionably a lot of power. If a judge come to us as a client, let me tell you where the power balance is. Number 5, imbalance of knowledge power. That means the more we know about another person, the more power we have. And many times our clients will do a really good search and we know about us a lot, much more than we know about them, without even self-disclosure, because they'll just search us online. Number 6, coercive power. This is when forcing someone against one's will, overpowering them. Number 7, reward power. If I can give reward in many ways by expressing gratitude or giving money, whatever it is the power in reward and power in withholding reward. Number 8, reference power, the power of admiration that can go also us towards our clients towards us, can admiring each other. Manipulative power. This is a devious, controlling power by passive-aggressive person, and as I did in another presentation, altogether the borderline personality disorder have incredible amount of power. So here are the 9 types of power, and so we are moving away from the idea of an inherent power differential. And this is kind of a silly idea, and applying sometimes, and many times it doesn't. Let's go to myth number 2. Myth number 2 is risk management's inherent part of the standard of care. That's not true. We have all of us gone to risk management presentation primarily by the insurance companies and many other ethicists that adopted it, and where they instruct us, don't touch, don't leave the office with a client, don't accept gift, don't give gifts, don't barter, don't self-disclose, don't engage into a relationship, don't make a home visit. Don't, and don't. So none of the above don'ts list are inherently below the standard of care. And we'll talk later that actually depend on the context. So risk management is promoted by insurance company in order to reduce their potential liability. It's not necessarily the standard of care. This was myth number 2. Moving forward to myth number 3. Physical touch in psychotherapy is unethical and is likely to lead to sex. We have been told this by ethic expert, attorney, continuing education instructor, supervisor, never to touch our client beyond a handshake. But touch has been increasingly perceived as a risk management issue to be avoided rather than one of the most powerful ways to connect with and heal our clients. The paranoid notion that non-sexual touch is likely to lead to sexual relationship is countered by greater understanding of the importance of touch for human connection, for bonding, and reducing stress and anxiety and depression in our clients. So despite of this half century of extensive knowledge and research as emotional, relational, physiological and behavioral benefit of touch, many therapists still shy away from appropriate non-sexual touch due to the fear of boards, attorneys, and lack of training in the area of touch. Even though most therapists touch their clients by patting them on the back, holding a hand, or giving an appropriate hug at the end of the session per their request, they do not write or talk much about it. So kind of they present, we don't touch our client, even though it's not true. The good news that more and more clinicians are opening in the last few years at the beginning of the new century to the idea of touch. Even though the U.S. culture tend to sexualize most kind of touch, clinicians are increasingly aware of the importance of touch with those who are depressed, anxious, stressed, as well as clinically appropriate touch with children, with women, even with women who were sexually abused, in the right time, in the right modality, in the right way. As Montague states 50, 70 years ago, among all senses, touch stands paramount. This is Montague. Let's move to myth number 4. Dual relationship in counseling are always unethical, constitute ill-advised boundary violation, and are likely to lead to sex. I mean, this is kind of so idiotic. Some of you know my work. I wrote books about it. American Psychological Association published my books on boundaries. wrote dozens of articles, including YouTube's. Dual relationship or multiple relationship in psychotherapy refer to any situation where multiple roles exist between therapist and a client. So example, when the client is also a student or a friend or member in the community or some business associate. When I moved from Berkeley to the small town of Sonoma, I got a call about a month later, and there was a couple on the phone, and they kind of wanted to see me for couple therapy. And I said, how do you know about me? Of course, where did you hear about me? And he said, Dr. Zur, I play basketball with you every Sunday in the adult league of basketball. And I see you giving hard fouls, getting hard fouls, and I really appreciate your sense of integrity. I protested, of course, that I give anytime hard fouls. And I asked her, what do you think about seeing me for therapist while I play basketball on Monday, while I play basketball with your husband on Sunday? And she said, Dr. Zur, 2 weeks ago, we went on a field trip with your daughter. I was a single father at the time in the town of Sonoma, and my daughter, and our daughter. And I saw you negotiating conflict among 5-year-old girls. And I told myself, if you can negotiate and come to peaceful among 5-year-old girls, you can do my husband and I. I said, that's kind of interesting. So I start calling around, and every attorney that I talked to, any expert on risk management, everybody gave me the same advice. Don't do a dual relationship. It leads to sex. And then I asked them, sex with whom? Sex with him? Sex with her? Perhaps a threesome? What the hell is the idea that dual relationship are unethical and lead to sex? So this is when I kind of, it was like 38 years ago, I start my campaign about the importance of dual relationship. And it's the idea that dual relationship are unethical and lead to sex is stupid in many, many settings. As I said, police, military, it's mandated. And the small town, it's unavoidable. So a dual role of a therapist as an expert witness is, for example, a good example where dual relationship constitute ethical violation, because the therapist acting in two incompatible modes of a therapist, psychotherapy, and expert witness for the courts. So this is really important. One of the most common complaint to the board is psychotherapists making custody evaluation. And they say, oh, Johnny should be with mom, or Johnny should be with dad. So engaging in this dual role as an expert, as a custody expert, is one of the most common reasonable reason for therapists to be disciplined by the licensing board. So some dual relationship are below the standard of care. Some dual relationship are mandated, like in the military and prisons, where our loyalty is to the high command, not to the client. And some are unavoidable. So mandated, illegal, and unavoidable. So we need to kind of be able to differentiate. Other examples of dual relationships that are not within the standard of care is psychologists who conduct forensic evaluation, such as sanity to stand trial or custody evaluation, should avoid dual multiple relationship, should avoid clinical relationship with the client. So to wrap it up, non-sexual dual relationships are not necessarily unethical or legal. Sexual exploitative and harmful dual relationships are obviously unethical and illegal and should be avoided. So perhaps re-emphasize one aspect that I discovered in Sonoma and later on here in the small town of Sebastopol. The dual relationships are often unavoidable in rural and small community. I talked before in the military and forensic setting, it's mandated. But sometimes you go to church and people choose you because they met you at church, because they met you at LGBTIQ community. and or in the HIV community, or Hispanic, African American, Asian, or other minority community, and they choose you because they met you within the community, because you are likely to share values with them. And almost all ethical guidelines for psychologists, social workers, counselors, MFT do not mandate blanket avoidance of all dual relationship. All guidelines do prohibit sexual dual relationship with current client or recently terminated client, and prohibit exploitation of clients via dual relationship. Okay, myth number 5. As a slippery slope argument predict, boundary crossing inevitably lead to boundary violation. That's another thing that I wrote a lot about, presented a lot about. The baseless and paranoid idea of the slippery slope has been with us for too long, and when followed result in substandard care. So it's rather idiotic to assert that non-sexual touch is likely to lead to sexual touch. Always. Simple gift giving result in social relationship. No, I go to Israel, I come back with some water from the Jordan River to some of my Christian clients, and it does not lead to social dual relationship. I have done bartering with a client, and another idiotic myth is that bartering inevitably ends in exploitation. He gave me a painting, and he got 10 sessions for that, and the price was the same price that he would have paid me before, and whatever he sold it to the public. Number 6, myth number 6. We have 10 myths, and we're at number 6. Don't blame the victims. Victims are always 100% innocent. I have a whole YouTube on that. I'll make it short here. The victim stance is a very powerful one in our culture. The victim is always morally right, neither responsible nor accountable, and forever entitled to sympathy. So what I'm interested in differentiated between different kind of guilt. Not all victims are created equal. Level 1 is 100% innocent victim, for example, would be abused children, abused, disabled, or mentally ill people, victims of earthquake, when in a non-earthquake zone, sometimes poor people, victim of corporate greed. So this would be a non-guilty, 100% innocent. I have 5 levels. Number 2 will be victims with minor guilt. And this is kind of somebody driving into dangerous environment, knowing that people get shot there. My grandparents died in the Holocaust, and they helped the Nazis really to make life easier by self-organizing and self-controlled, and make it very easy for the Nazis to put in the gas chamber 6 million Jews. So sometimes there's guilty with minor guilt. Victims who share the responsibility with the perpetrator will be co-alcoholic, people who do to gun duel, people who get into drunk fighting in the bar and get injured. So they're kind of equally responsible for their hurt, damage, suffering. Number 4 is victims who are slightly more guilty than the offender, will be like mentally ill, who got hurt while being involved in school shooting. So that's kind of number 4 is very complex. Poor hungry people who got hurt while committing a desperate robbery. So that they had a robbery, but also there's something, they are poor and hungry. So it's kind of level 4 is very complex kind of in regard to responsibility. And then level 5 is those who are exclusively responsible for the victimization and for getting hurt. So if the child abuser or rapist who is killed or injured while committing the crime will be a classic example. Mercenaries who was killed during a battle that they wanted to make money off. And what's interesting about level 5, that many people who commit level 5 or full responsible were level 1 in their childhood, like the abuse. So the abused was number 1, non-guilty, when he or she were 5 or 10 year old, and when they hurt other, they become level 5. So we can talk a lot about it more, but I just want you to give it a sense. Psychotherapists and attorneys are in the front of those who fuel the victim industry in the US. Like Don't Blame the Victim have become a moratorium or exploring situation where victims bear responsibility. So do away with Don't Blame the Victim and do more in-depth, complex analysis of the situation. So as a result of not asking the question about the degree of victimhood, we have become a nation of victims. In reality, some victims are 100% innocent, like abused children, and others are willing and relentless participants in their own repetition victimization. So it's politically incorrect, but it's very important. Myth number 7. DSM is a scientifically valid and reliable document. That's another kind of one of my tantrum. Unlike what we were told most graduate school assessment workshop, in my humble opinion, the DSM is politically and economically driven document more than a scientific one. In my research and impressions have led me to believe the decision regarding including or excluding disorder in the DSM made by majority vote. So it's not like a science that everybody agree, rather than the review of acceptance of indisputably objective scientific data. One telling example is homosexuality was listed as a mental disorder in the DSM until 1974, when gay activists demonstrated in front of the American Psychiatric Association Convention of 1974. So then, at that year, the American Psychiatric Association showed 5,854 members supporting taking it out of the DSM, and 3,810 was opposing to removal of the disorder from the DSM. Ever since, homosexuality has not been regarded as a mental disorder. We didn't send people for psychiatry to fix it. We didn't give medication. So voting on what constitutes mental illness is truly bizarre and, needless to say, unscientific. So on top of that, the political pressures, it is my impression in recent years the DSM has been primarily driven by the psychopharmaceutical industry, which reaps huge profit from each new diagnosis that can be treated with psychotropic medications. So we have the politics and the financial aspect that create the categories within the DSM. Myth number 8. It is never ethical, legal, or okay for a psychotherapist to be naked with a client or to increase the likelihood of client's death. Again, the myth says that it's never okay for a therapist to be naked with a client, which kind of makes sense, of course. And it's never okay for a therapist to increase the chance of a client dying. And this is my way to say it's all about context. So, of course, we all say, hell no, being naked with a client, oh my God, no. So, having sex with a client is always unethical, counterclinical, illegal, etc. However, think about a situation. What happened to me when I moved to Sonoma, small town with one gym. I step out of the shower stall in the local gym, the local one gym, and suddenly I saw one of my clients also stepping out of his shower equally naked. So it was incidental contact. It was a chance occurrence, or we call it out of office experience, but it can take place in the community. What I want to emphasize that what happened between therapist and client outside the room it depends on the context. I talk to military people who served on a aircraft carrier, and they encounter the clients in the gym, and also sometimes naked. Nude beaches or hot tubs in some recreation areas. Also, when people are bathing nude in a pond, like in Esalen, at the end of the day, you may bump into a client too. So it's all about context. And the other thing about promoting potential deaths for clients by therapists happens, for example, in the military, and there is interesting movies about it too. So when a therapist helps soldiers overcome hysterical blindness and send them back to the unit so they can be engaged in the next battle, and sometimes in Second World War with 60% chance of death. So, so therapists, by fixing people with hysterical blindness, expose them to 50-60% chance of dying in the next battle. Context and context. And the factors that in context that we need to follow up will be clients factors, therapy factors, location, setting, community, therapeutic relationship factors, and the therapist factor. So I can talk about each of these factors for another half an hour, but I have a lot of written pieces about it, but the emphasis in this one is about context. And the nudity and promoting clients' death are extreme examples that hopefully will help you to say, what's the context and how does ethics and laws and relationship fit into this context? Myth number 9, we are almost done. Malpractice lawsuits against psychotherapists and counselors are common, and therapists should be very concerned. We have been indoctrinated to fear lawsuits in our licensing board. The simple fact is that social workers, MFTs, and counselors pay about $300-400 a year for malpractice. We psychologists pay about $1,000 or $1,200. And then pay between $50,000 a year or up to $150,000 a year in some states, because the level of risk is so high for cardiologists when somebody died on the table, anesthesiologists also if something wrong with anesthesiology, and obstetric when the child being born dead, they'll be sued. So again, these doctors pay $50,000 or $150,000 compared to how much we therapists paying $300 all the way to $1,200. And so we also relax about being sued. It's not happening. If it was happening more often, we'll pay more, much more. The percentage of complaints to licensing board are more frequent than lawsuits, but it's not as high as many attorneys, ethicists, or risk management lead us to believe. Even when the charges are brought, most complaints to licensing board drop without any charges being filed. And I'm involved in this kind of, both in the few lawsuits and numerous board complaints all over the United States, all over the states. And so I know from personal professional experience what's happening with that. Number 10, last one. Digital age and telemental health significantly reduce the risk of therapists violating boundaries or sexually engaging with their client. So it makes sense in some regard, but looking at it more deeply, we have this incredible phenomena of disinhibition effect. When the online bearing professional versus personal judgment, and at night, at 2 o'clock in the night, we're texting easily falls into sexting. So there's less physical, sexual touch or any other blurring of boundaries. However, the disinhibition effect, when we are not in the same room, when we cannot reach and physically touch, we can engage moving from texting to sexting. And I have seen sometimes literally 2,000 texting between therapist and client, or social media exchanges between therapist and client at 1, 2, or midnight at night. And of course, it's indefensible. And it's easily to print out and to show, to prove that indeed it was sexting between the therapist and the client. So the disinhibition effect brings excessive self-disclosure, looser boundaries, and potential sexting for us to pay attention. So avoid that. What I suggest, you don't, in the office policies, you say, I'm not texting or email or responding to any client request or comments after 6 o'clock in the afternoon. You can always call the crisis line, the 988. It now become national, even when they're suicidal. And the suicide hotline are much better than most of us because they have thousands of people that they've helped in the past. So no excuse because my client is suicidal, I talk to him or her every night at 2 o'clock in the morning. This is no excuse. This is, with all my defense work, I cannot defend it when I get this hundreds, dozens, thousands of emails or social media exchange. So thank you for listening for the 10 tantrums that I call, the 10 concerns that I have with our field. I hope the overview the overview in this YouTube recording is helpful, and feel free to forward it to others. I have many more YouTubes and hundreds of free articles for free on my website at www.drzur.com, www.drzur.com. Be well.